The geopolitical landscape of the Western Hemisphere has been profoundly altered in a matter of weeks. We are analyzing the final critical stage of an aggressive military maneuver that is no longer a threat but a near certainty. The United States has completed an unprecedented military deployment, signaling an imminent operation to remove Nicolás Maduro from power. This mission is publicly framed by the Trump administration as a war on drug trafficking and narco-terrorism, but every military asset now in position confirms the real goal is regime change, backed by a significant intervention capability. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end, even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The sheer scale of the force concentrated near Venezuela is unparalleled since the 1994 operation in Haiti. This is not a low-profile counter-narcotics mission. This is a full-spectrum invasion task force. At the heart of this deployment is the USS Gerald R carrier strike group, a colossal asset that has been aggressively repositioned from the Mediterranean. The presence of the Ford, carrying up to 90 aircraft and thousands of personnel, ensures immediate and overwhelming air superiority over the entire Venezuelan coastline and its critical military installations. This action signals that Trump is willing to risk a major conventional military escalation, a decision that goes far beyond simple interdiction patrols. The deployment of the carrier strike group is buttressed by a comprehensive air and sea arsenal designed to neutralize all resistance. Alongside the Ford are multiple Aegis-equipped destroyers armed with cruise missiles, a deployment explicitly designed to suppress Venezuela's Russian-supplied S-300 air defense systems. Furthermore, the region has seen the arrival of F-35 fifth-generation fighter jets, which provide unmatched stealth and intelligence capabilities, and flights of strategic B-52 bombers, serving as a clear message of long-range punitive capacity to Caracas. However, the most telling piece of evidence confirming the intent is the presence of the specialized vessel, the MV Ocean Trader. This former commercial ship has been covertly adapted for U.S. Special Operations Forces. Its discreet nature and customized capabilities make it the ideal clandestine platform for launching helicopters and inserting ground troops. The presence of the Ocean Trader, along with the massive field preparation near the old Roosevelt Roads base in Puerto Rico, which is being reactivated as a major air and logistical hub, unequivocally indicates that the goal is not merely aerial bombardment. The entire infrastructure is geared toward a ground operation, the swift capture or liquidation of key regime figures, including Nicolás Maduro himself. This setup removes any doubt that Trump is aiming for a rapid, surgical regime change. The massive military deployment orchestrated by Trump is not a defensive action against drug cartels. It is a meticulously calculated application of force designed to achieve two primary strategic goals: regime change in Caracas and the immediate acquisition of Venezuela's immense oil reserves. This is a classic shock and awe doctrine updated for a critical geopolitical target, executed to prevent a costly, drawn-out conflict. The ultimate driving force behind this operation is the oil factor. Venezuela possesses the world's largest proven oil reserves, a colossal resource that remains largely untapped due to years of sanctions and political mismanagement by the Maduro regime. For the U.S. and its corporate interests, opening these fields is a strategic priority.
not only to secure energy resources for American companies, but also to potentially flood the global market with crude, thereby lowering prices and dealing a devastating blow to the economy of Putin, a critical secondary objective tied directly to the war in Ukraine. The official rhetoric about narco-terrorism is merely the legal and public justification for this raw geopolitical ambition. The operation itself is anticipated to follow a swift, three-phased scenario designed for minimum exposure and maximum disruption. The first phase is suppression and shock. The attack will begin with a coordinated barrage of precision missile and aerial strikes launched from destroyers and the USS Gerald R carrier group. The initial targets will be non-negotiable: air defense systems, radar installations, key military air bases, and command and control bunkers. The goal of this phase is to establish overwhelming air dominance within hours, crippling the ability of the Venezuelan military to coordinate any meaningful resistance. Trump's primary concern here is speed, knowing that any prolonged conflict increases domestic political risk. The second and most critical phase is decapitation. The U.S. strategy aims to avoid a long, drawn-out guerrilla conflict that would turn Venezuela into another Afghanistan. The fastest way to achieve this is through regime collapse from the top. Following the initial airstrikes, specialized forces will be tasked with the highly sensitive mission of capturing or eliminating Nicolas Maduro and his inner circle. This is a high-risk, high-reward mission, echoing the strategy of the 1989 invasion of Panama to remove Manuel Noriega, but adapted for a modern, densely populated capital like Caracas. The entire logic is based on the collapse of the military high command's loyalty once their political master is removed. The third phase is consolidation and control. Once the regime's central command is neutralized, a limited ground force will secure critical infrastructure, particularly the key oil refineries and terminals. The presence of the hospital ship USNS Comfort and the sheer amount of logistical support vessels in the deployment suggests that Washington is prepared for the inevitable internal chaos and humanitarian consequences, but the emphasis remains on a quick, decisive operation to install a transitional government. The entire plan is a high-stakes kinetic gambit that aims to solve geopolitical, economic, and internal political problems simultaneously, with the core goal being to seize the resources necessary to fuel the American economy while strategically weakening the coffers of Vladimir Putin.
The critical weakness in Nicolas Maduro's defense strategy is not the size of his army, but its absolute, structural incapacity to challenge U.S. air superiority. This is the third phase of the strategy: the assurance that the American intervention will meet with negligible resistance in the air, guaranteeing a quick, low-cost path to the decapitation phase. Maduro's Russian-supplied air defense shield, once touted as formidable, is now exposed as a hollow, crumbling deterrent. The primary flaw lies in the maintenance and logistics of Russian hardware. Over the past decade, Venezuela has been a consistent recipient of advanced weaponry from Moscow, most notably the S-300 long-range surface-to-air missile systems and thousands of man-portable air defense systems like the Igla-S. On paper, this arsenal should provide a decent defense, but years of crippling sanctions, coupled with systemic corruption and the collapse of the Venezuelan economy, have rendered much of this hardware functionally obsolete. Maintenance schedules have been ignored, crucial spare parts are unavailable, and technical proficiency has declined drastically. The army is now fighting with systems that are not just older, but actively breaking down. This material degradation sets the stage for a profoundly unequal contest. The high-tech, integrated strike package deployed by Trump, led by F-35 stealth fighters, cruise missile-equipped destroyers, and the USS Gerald R. Ford's carrier air wing, is explicitly designed to exploit these vulnerabilities. The Venezuelan military is reliant on a static, centralized defense structure,
a system that is an easy and predictable target for the overwhelming electronic warfare and suppression of enemy air defense capabilities of the US. The Russian-supplied S-300s, while potent, can be quickly located and neutralized by stealth and saturation tactics. Furthermore, the thousands of Igla-S manpads, which Maduro boasts about using for a potential people's war, are largely ineffective against the primary threat. These systems are designed to counter low-flying aircraft or helicopters, but they are nearly useless against high-velocity, precision-guided cruise missiles launched from hundreds of miles away, or against advanced stealth fighters operating at high altitude. The US does not need to fly its air force into the range of portable missiles. It can destroy the core of the Venezuelan command structure from beyond the horizon. The guarantee of American air dominance within the first few hours of the operation is the single most critical factor for the overall success of the regime change doctrine. The overwhelming technological superiority ensures that the ground forces and special operations teams tasked with securing critical oil infrastructure and capturing Maduro will face minimal risk from organized Venezuelan military resistance. The structural weaknesses, the corruption, the lack of spare parts, and the reliance on a static, centralized defense model guarantee that the air defense shield will be quickly pierced, leading to a rapid collapse of Venezuelan military cohesion.
The comprehensive analysis of the impending U.S. operation reveals a final, critical layer of vulnerability. Nicolás Maduro is strategically and unequivocally alone. His desperate appeals for aid from his international partners, Russia, China, and Iran, have been met not with decisive military support, but with diplomatic platitudes and cautious silence. This systemic geopolitical isolation confirms that the threat of secondary sanctions and the fear of direct confrontation with the US are potent weapons, leaving Maduro strategically naked before an overwhelming military force. Maduro is caught in a profound diplomatic trap. His years of political allegiance to Moscow and Beijing were predicated on a simple transactional belief. In the event of an external threat, his allies would intervene, or at least provide the material support necessary for his regime to survive. The reality, now starkly exposed by the deployment of the U.S. carrier strike group, is that Maduro is entirely expendable. Russia, Maduro's primary historical military supplier, is crippled by its own ambition. Vladimir Putin, bogged down in the costly war in Ukraine, simply lacks the capacity and the strategic reserve to open a second front thousands of miles away in the Western Hemisphere. The Russian military-industrial complex is currently straining to meet its own war demands and cannot spare the modern, functional weapon systems, missile stockpiles, or naval assets required to challenge the U.S. fleet in the Caribbean. Furthermore, Putin cannot afford the political risk. Any direct intervention would be read as a declaration of war against the U.S. and would lead to an immediate, crippling escalation of sanctions against Moscow, precisely what the Kremlin is struggling to manage. Therefore, Russia's support is relegated to symbolic gestures, such as the ratification of old strategic partnership agreements and hollow promises of logistical aid. The situation with China and Iran is equally futile for Caracas. These powers, while ideologically aligned, are governed by cold, calculated self-interest. China's global economic strategy would be catastrophically undermined by engaging in a military conflict with the US on the South American continent. Beijing's priority is the integrity of its own trade and financial system, not the survival of a distant, volatile regime. Similarly, Iran's military capacity is already stretched, and the nation cannot afford to risk a naval confrontation with the US Navy. The overwhelming threat of secondary sanctions wielded by Trump works like a charm. It ensures that the diplomatic support offered by these allies remains strictly rhetorical, preventing any tangible military or major financial assistance from reaching Caracas. This isolation is the ultimate strategic blow to Maduro. It confirms that the threat of US power,
combined with the reality of his allies' self-interest, is an insurmountable barrier. The Venezuelan military, already struggling with corruption and a chronic lack of spare parts for its Russian-supplied arsenal, now knows that no reinforcements are coming. The failure of Russia to protect its closest ally in the region serves as a chilling testament to its weakened global influence and the strategic exhaustion imposed by the war in Ukraine. Maduro is left to face the full weight of the U.S. military alone, reliant only on a demotivated, under-equipped army and a poorly trained civilian militia.
We have meticulously analyzed the military plan to neutralize Nicolas Maduro. Now we must confront the final, crucial strategic consequence of that operation. A successful intervention in Venezuela is an immediate, decisive blow to the financial heart of Vladimir Putin's war effort. The fate of the conflict in Ukraine is now directly tied to the collapse of global oil prices, a collapse that would fatally undermine the Russian budget and force Putin to the negotiating table. The success of Trump's regime change doctrine in Caracas would instantly trigger a massive, favorable shift in the global energy market. Venezuela possesses the world's largest proven oil reserves, a colossal volume that, once accessible and brought online by Western companies, would inject a significant, immediate surplus of crude onto the world market. The geopolitical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. The sudden surge in Venezuelan supply would inevitably lead to a sharp drop in global oil prices. For Putin, whose entire war budget relies on maintaining high oil revenues, this event would be a catastrophic financial shock. This external supply surge would eliminate the last pillar of Russia's economic defense. The new, cheap Venezuelan crude would immediately and directly displace Russian oil from its remaining key markets, primarily India and Turkey. These nations, which are operating purely on commercial pragmatism, would rapidly switch to the cheaper, unsanctioned Venezuelan supply. This is the strategic nail in the coffin. Russia's already diminished oil revenue, which is suffering from sanctions, high transportation costs, and deep discounts, would be further compressed to a point of critical insolvency. The financial domino effect on the Russian state would be immediate and profound. The loss of hard currency revenue is the singular variable that dictates the length and scope of the war. With oil revenue collapsing, the Kremlin would instantly lose the means to finance its massive budget deficit, replenish its catastrophic equipment losses, and continue paying the salaries of its army. The entire strategy of the war of attrition, which is predicated on outlasting Ukraine, would be rendered impossible. This economic collapse is the ultimate tool of coercion. Putin, trapped by a war he cannot win and an economy he cannot finance, would be forced to choose the only rational off-ramp: peace negotiations on terms dictated by the West and Ukraine. The objective of the Venezuelan operation is thus not solely about anti-narcotics. It is a profound strategic flanking maneuver designed to cut the financial throat of the Russian war machine, thereby accelerating the end of the conflict in Ukraine.